Hi. I guess I just. Hi, Anand.
Hi,
Hi.
how are you?
Good. I think we already have few people live. So maybe we should start.
Right.
So welcome everyone to this IG Live by India Development Review or IDR. IDR is an online journal that covers issues around development. My name is Smaranita, and I have with me today Anand Arkalgud of Socion. Uh, and Socion is a social enterprise that actually works with a range of stakeholders, governments, nonprofits, multilateral agencies, to make sure like we can at least attempt to address societal issues at scale. And thing we're going to be talking to him about is why are development problems so hard to solve? I think all of us who live and work here know that as a country we grapple with issues around education, healthcare, water, climate change. But we also know that there are a range of organizations and individuals and uh, governments working to kind of solve this. But there's still the problem. The problems keep outpacing the solution, right? And I think today we'll have Anand speak to why we think some of these problems are so hard to solve, just because he spent so much time like working in the field, working with a range of stakeholders, grappling with this issue. So Anand, do you want to kind of start and give us a little bit of sense of, in the work that you've done, why are you seeing this happen? Why aren't we able to
Sure.
solve for this?
Yeah. Thanks, and it's a pleasure to be here. So maybe I should take a step back and kind of tell you some of the things we learned very early in the journey. We're relatively new, so we've been in this sector for about 5+ years, but sort of focused on this particular issue, saying why aren't we able to tackle these problems at scale? And the first thing that is humbling is the nature of the problem itself, right? So we've talked about this before. These problems, and again, when we talk about problems, we do need to differentiate between, issues or, efforts for charity, disaster relief and management, and development. Development is a particular class of problem, I think, which exists because the conditions that exist in the society and ecosystem uh, destroys the agencies of individuals or communities to do things that many of us consider to or take for granted or are able to do by ourselves, right? So it prevents them from having equitable access to resources, health, life, dignity, or opportunity. Now, these problems exist from a sectoral perspective, they exist in many ways, right? Natural resource management, there's degradation of forest lands, there is water scarcity, but actually it is water security. There's a lot of water, it rains, but our ability to harness that water and harvest it and make it available for drinking and farming and so on and so forth. Violence against women and the mindsets that exist or continue to propagate, sanitation issues, so on and so forth. So this idea that we live in an imperfect system and this imperfect system has many little levers, and sometimes these levers don't work as well as we might have imagined them, and they prevent many people from participating in a way that allows them to have a healthy life, live with dignity, access resources or access opportunities like everybody else. Right. So this is the first thing. Now these problems tend to be. We used to always say that problems are always connected, and if you look at the ecosystem, a problem of water or problem of sanitation eventually gets connected with the problem of water, right? You might build a toilet, but if you can't provide water, that causes a problem. But then you build a toilet, but if you inadvertently build that toilet and the way you build that toilet is built on a zone where there is groundwater below, at some point that waste from that could seep into the groundwater system and contaminate water. That can then result in a health issue, particularly for children or young adults and so on and so forth. So like these problems are all intricately connected to each other, right? So the first thing is for us to understand how complex these problems are, and it's very humbling when you realize that. And the first thing we learned is that we have to embrace this complexity. This is one part. The second thing is these problems are very dynamic. I mean, take, for example, today's situation. If you take climate change, if you take COVID, they're so globally interconnected. I mean, you can't say that we will solve climate change in India or in the United States or in China. You have to solve it globally. If one part of the world continues to, find it difficult to solve that problem, then everybody else then pays the price for it. Right? If one part of the world has high rates of COVID, everybody else is on guard. Travel restrictions come in, because we're such a connected world. So these problems tend to be very dynamic. They're constantly changing. And second is time is of the essence. So if you take, for example, children's education, if you say, okay, children between the age of 5 and 10 need certain inputs. You can't say, give me 20 years because there's a lot of children. We'll get to so many children a year. By 20 years, that child is an adult, probably living in poverty or something. The thing that we imagined, the nightmare scenario, has already happened, right? So these problems cannot wait. So part of the underlying sort of realization for us is that these problems, and also these problems occur at such scale. Many of us find it very hard to comprehend that scale, right? I was telling somebody, and we got to know about this in many sectors. Collectively, while we know 200 million children need this and 600,000 villages need this and so many people are migrants, water migrants, and so on and so forth, these big numbers get floated around. If you look at the sum total of efforts, collective efforts on the ground, they don't exceed more than 3 to 5% of that number, which means we are at least 20 years away from reaching all of them. Forget sustaining, reaching all of them. So but from an organization perspective or from a state government perspective, this itself might be a big deal. Last year we did 1,000 villages. This year we're doing 5,000 villages. Big deal. But 5,000 villages in the context of 55,000 villages in a state is really not cutting it, right? So our ability to comprehend scale, our ability to embrace complexity and find ways to resolve problems that are complex, and our ability to sort of act with speed, because without speed you can't reach scale, right? And the problem will continue to mutate, and you'll miss the point because you might have a solution today, but the problem changes so much that your solution may become irrelevant if you wait too long. This is the underlying, crux of the issue. Everything else comes after, saying, so how do we tackle it? But I think, first of all, most people need to first sit back and acknowledge this, right? And embrace this and understand that you cannot pick out a small piece of the problem and saying we will just solve that problem, right? Because it is rather irrelevant. We can say, oh, we made a vaccine. But if you cannot deliver that vaccine to everybody in a certain amount of time, then it doesn't really solve the problem. So there is a difference between solving problems and resolving problems. And if we want to resolve problems, right, we have to outpace these problems, meaning we have to move fast enough and we have to find a way to collectively work on these problems in a manner that we can reach the scale of the problem, match the problem in its intensity, in its complexity, right? It's not a luxury. It's not even an option. And I think for us, every time we think it is an option, we kind of end up chasing the problem for the rest of our lives. This is the underlying issue. Yeah.
But can this be like a daunting thing, right? I mean, because the scale of the problem in India, like you said, is massive, right? As in, like, and to even say that, where do I begin? Will it like stop a lot of people from, actually, doing anything
Absolutely.
versus like they're doing something that they're doing right now?
No, understandably so, right? I mean, I think sometimes when you sit and talk like this, it sounds so impossible. They're like, forget it, why bother, right? Might
Right,
as well
right,
wait and
right.
enjoy our
Correct.
lives or whatever it is that other options that we have. But in reality, what we found is that we are capable of solving very complex problems, right? If you look back over the last 20, 30 years and you look at some ecosystems, we found that there are different ecosystems that we exist in. We might only be looking at the one that is broken, but there are ones that actually work. If you take the travel ecosystem, right?
Right.
I'm giving a commercial example. I mean, can you tell me how many people around the world are involved in the travel industry and how magically a person sitting in a village in India can travel to Italy if they want to? They
Right,
can find
right.
information, they can trust that information, they can find a tourist travel agent, they can buy tickets on. I mean, they can plan, they can figure out how much it is, they can trust that information, actually get there and get back if they want to. If they dream of it, they can plan for it and do it, right? Not that that's the ultimate goal. I'm just saying the
Right.
agency, the ecosystem is so flush with information, facts, knowledge, etc., that people are able to do that. So it's not like we're incapable of doing it. We have to look back and say we're actually capable. For some reason, we're not learning from those experiences and applying those experiences to the areas where these problems continue to exist and where the ecosystem is still very weak, right?
Yeah.
Where individuals, we say, right, in areas like nutrition, early motherhood, water security, etc., it takes extraordinary effort to accomplish ordinary outcomes, right? Where we need to be is a situation where ordinary efforts by ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary outcomes, right? And if we look at our own lifespans in the last 10, 15 years, there are many things that have changed like that. Why not apply that thinking to a societal problem? Something as essential as water, something as essential as climate, something that allows us to combat these ongoing pandemics and so on and so forth. And I think once that conversation starts to look at the fact that and acknowledge the fact that we are capable, provided we are willing to sort of look at the problem from that perspective, right? It actually brings out hope. I mean, we've gone through that journey ourselves, right? And we realize it's actually very empowering, because then suddenly you realize, saying, imagine we could be part of a solution to such problems, right? And that is super empowering. And I think that switch is possible, and we're seeing many people do that.
No, and you mentioned something, in your travel example as well, about agency, right? And like, what that means and what the potential of agency, in communities, in individuals. I mean,
right.
A prerequisite to kind of actually change. Like, you want to kind of talk a little bit more about,
Yeah.
like versus like top-down solutions versus like individuals saying, I choose to do this.
Right. Yeah, so this is one of the best lessons I learned, and we as an organization, I think, spent a lot of time thinking about. Initially, it came up when I was volunteering with the Societal Platform Initiative, and there's a lot of really good, interesting thinking there. And the question was, what is agency? And agency is, I'm not giving you the what is that?
I don't think our audience will understand the technical definition. So maybe
no, it's just my ability as an individual, my confidence that I can actually pursue and do something, right? At the most simplest level, I should have the confidence that if I want to, that I can do this, right? And overcome whatever hurdles or access resources or find people. And at a simplistic level, this agency has three things, right? One is typically when you think about solving any problem or pursuing any opportunity or going down a certain path and accomplishing something, you're either looking for resources, and then you would think about how, if I get those resources, how do I have the capability to convert those resources into outcomes, right? And then more importantly, what is my imagination of an outcome that is better or much better than what it has been, right? So usually for people, these three things. Now what happens is, as I was saying, the conditions that currently exist may prevent people from, or may give them the perception. Sometimes it's not reality, it's perception, right? What we call traditional loss of agency. In the past, nobody has got money, therefore I will never get money. Are humko nahi milega types, right? Even if I go and try, I will not get it. Right? Even if you go to their home, they'll say, I don't want it, because they believe that this is not attainable, right? So that is the damage of a system that is not working well, where the agency can be continuously destroyed. Same way, you can also create agency. Like, for example, if you demonstrate to people, and if you are able to, for example, cut down certain barriers to access. Aadhaar did that for a lot of people. I mean, once people realize that with Aadhaar, you don't have to bring too much other documentation, right? Those documentation were barriers for a lot of people. We would somehow manage, we'd go and get a duplicate of our birth certificate and all that stuff. But some people didn't even have a last name. So how do you establish your identity becomes a problem for them. So there are mechanisms where you can change the conditions in the ecosystem that makes it easier for people to access those resources. I mean, same with knowledge. I mean, if you want to cook, I know, some South Indian dish or North Indian dish or, Bengali dish, just go online and you'll find like 50 different versions of it and different people telling you how to make it better than my mother's recipe, right? But you go, where do you go if your well is dry, right? What resources can you find? I mean, what are the answers to that problem? So for some reason, we have models that show what it looks like. People don't go to some well-known chef every time they want to cook something, right? They will ask an aunt, they'll ask an uncle. There's so many resources around them. Somehow they'll figure out, and they'll make their own version of palak paneer or whatever, right? And they'll be really happy with it. That is really what we need. That is what agency looks like, where people feel that they are empowered, right? And that the system is going to enable them to go and do what they want to do, accomplish. Each person's imagination of what they want to accomplish might be different from somebody else, right?
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
okay. But they should feel that they have to go. So what we realized is, if you want to solve these problems at scale, the most sustainable way, because these problems are complex and dynamic, it's not like you reached a village and you did something and the problem is solved forever. No, problems of water, sanitation, health, violence, agriculture, productivity, pest management, all of these things are dynamic problems. So you have to not only internalize that knowledge, you have to continue to invest in that knowledge and capabilities. So that community has to work on that year on year to keep adapting. If something changed, weather changed, new pest came in, some
Right.
drought happened, I have to keep adapting, right? I can't stop. So it's a continuous process. So it's not just reaching 600,000 villages, it's reaching and staying and sustaining in 600,000 villages, right? So if you think about it from that perspective, we realize that the only answer is find people in that community, give them, strengthen their agency and their ability, make them champions of this problem. Just like we have a teacher, right? We have a medical officer or somebody in a village. And it's not like you have everybody knows medicine. It's not like that. You have one person, right? So we have this concept of frontline workers in India and cadres, which is quite unique, actually. It's not common around the world. You could empower them. They're members from the community. They also need something meaningful to do. And this is the other beautiful thing about this approach of participatory development, which is finding people in the community, connecting them to this knowledge grid, connecting them to the resource grid and saying, what do you need? And connecting them to the imagination grid, right? Saying, how can you learn from others' ideas? Look at what that village did and what do you want to do? Reach out to people. How do we connect them to this mainstream grid of knowledge, resources, and imagination? This is really what we realized. And unfortunately, while very few people disagree with this idea, right? I mean, anybody I've encountered, everybody believes this is the way we should do, right? However, if you look at the actual way we do things, they tend to be much more programmatic. So what happens is the idea is participatory at the beginning. But once you've become programmatic, then you have 5 years, then you have to accomplish certain goals, then there's a lot of pressure comes in, and then you want to make plans, and you don't stop to think, saying you may be destroying agency because that person doesn't know why they're doing this anymore, right? How do we ask? So we have models that know how to deliver services, but we don't have models that ask. And I'll give you one example of how critical this is, because fundamentally the people in those communities are the ones that are facing the problem. To think that they're not thinking about a solution, I think is very, I won't give it a word, but I think it borders on arrogance on our part. I know it is not intentional, right? But we're missing the point. How is it possible that somebody is living in that community and they're not feeling the pinch when they don't have access to water? It's not possible. So I remember we were in a forum where there were people from agriculture, water management, etc., very senior people. And one farmer was also invited, and a few frontline workers were invited. We went through the day, different people talking, how to do things at scale, blah, blah, blah. At the end of it, the farmer was writing something, so I asked him, saying, do you have something to share? And he said, yeah, I'll say it in Kannada. I said, I'll try and translate. So we got up. Man, the guy says, look, I come from a community which has maybe 100 farming families. We're all second, third generation farmers. This is in my blood. This is my identity. This is what I do. There's nothing else. I'm not going to go turn around and do software development. Farming is my lifeblood, right? When we meet, we talk about it. This is what we discuss. So I've got some great ideas here. Thank you very much. I'll take it and I will discuss with people, right? But if your real question is, what can you do to help us improve farm productivity and improve, the way we farm and how we farm and so on and so forth? He said, give us a middle school teacher, which is completely outside the scope of the people in that room, right? Nobody is from the education sector, if you will. So he said, let me explain. He says, we have primary school, we have secondary school, but in middle school, we have money for midday meals, shirt, pant, tie, and all that is provided for, but one teacher is missing. So what we felt as parents, as farmers, we have decided that our children should be educated. That is a minimum. right?
Hmm.
So because we are so committed, we started to realize that in the absence of the teacher, their education is not being taken care of. So we are starting to get worried. So all of us have slowly shifted our children to a convent in the city. Now, because our children are young, my wife had to go with them. So our wives have left the house and are living with our children. We're spending 7 times there as we get for our own crop, right? It really makes us mad. And all our money is leaving. Those kids, when they were at home after school, they'd come and help out in the farm. Now I've lost 3 pairs of hands,
Hmm.
right? So if you give us one middle school teacher, 100 families, children will come back. Wives will come back, money will come back, and we will put all of that back into farming, right? I even get
Yeah.
goosebumps even today when I talk about this, because it's an incredible illustration of how we have systems that tell, but we don't have systems that work at scale that can listen and respond to people's demand, right?
So yeah. Sorry. So for many of you all who's joined right now, I'm in conversation with Anand, who's talking about like the scale and the complexity of development problems, and what can be done to change this. And that's going to be my question, Anand, saying that people who've been in like non-profit, civil society organizations who spend time working with communities, right? And you're saying we spend so much time teaching and training that we're not listening. Um, what what needs to change as in, because everyone's going there with good intentions, right? Like you said, nobody
Yeah, yeah,
wants
yeah.
to like not solve, right? But uh, how does some of this change?
Right.
How do you
So
kind of factor in
I
like,
would be
yeah.
careful. I'd be careful to say we're not listening. I mean, that's not true. But what happens is because we understand the importance of listening, and because
Mm,
I think the social sector particularly is very good at it, and the organizations we've met particularly good at engaging communities. But it takes us the other way from solving these problems at scale. For example, we'll say, no, 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 we have to have this intense sort of engagement at the community level, deep engagement. We have to live in the community. We have to listen to them. We have to do that. But what it does is that then our unit of change becomes one community. That
mm,
model becomes very expensive, meaning, let's say you're spending 1 crore per community. Then for this problem, the country needs 600,000 crores, 6 lakh crores a year.
right,
That is not
right.
possible. Or we need too
Mm,
many experts, which is also not possible. In many cases, you will not have so many experts even in the ecosystem. Even if you look for them, and even if you can pay for them, they don't exist, right?
right.
So it's that we're listening, but we don't know how to listen at scale. So the question is not whether we're listening. We know we have to listen. We know this is the right way. We know the community is invested in solving this problem, and by having their opinion, we can do it. But we either resist scale by saying, no, 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 if we scale, we will lose all of this,
Mm,
and
mm,
therefore we're operating in small scale, right? So we will
right,
keep
right.
reporting 1,000 villages of amazing results while the other 599,000 continue to degrade, right? Or if we try to go to scale, then we become programmatic, which means we stop listening and we
Right.
take a template and implement that template for the next 5 years. Even if a person is standing in the village and screaming at the top of their voice saying, let's do something different, I know it's easier, it can be solved. We don't know how to do that. We just have to implement our template. So I think we have this sort of either or model. And I think what we are saying is there is something in between where we can actually listen and respond to demand at scale, right?
Mm,
And some part of this is bringing in digital, bringing in data, having the ability to observe what is happening, empowering people at the front lines, like I said, connecting them to the grid. So there are some ideas that we are working on, actually we are working on with multiple organizations that can help in bridging this gap.
yeah, yeah. And I think we have to finish. Is like what do we have to look forward to, right? Like you're saying, you're already working with organizations. You can see organizations who are working in communities having learned this, right? Like if listen to communities not as a unit but as to like individuals who know have possible solutions. How do we
Right.
move more organizations or more institutions or more communities to kind of take this approach of like this agency led approach, right? Saying where each individual knows what is good for them, for their community, for their families. How do we let them lead the way versus what's happened in the past? What's happening even now, right? Saying that working with communities, but still us designing solutions. How do you change that uh, paradigm in a sense?
It's going to take more than 5 minutes, but I'll try a 3 minute version of it.
Yeah.
So I think the good news is there's a lot of initiatives underway where we're trying things that seem to be very promising. Number one is See, we say in development, right? Because if you believe this participatory model, there is one person in the community who's really taking all the knowledge, the instructions, understands whom to contact, understands how to fill a form, understands how to apply for schemes, all of that, and facilitating that dialogue at the community level. So imagine this one person per village who's empowered to solve a problem, right? So the complexity at the village level is the least. If only we could just empower that one person, right? But if you look at it from the perspective of the program, let's say you're sitting in Delhi and trying to do this in 7,000 villages, then you're going to be mind-boggling because you're thinking each village is different, each person is different. So you see the maximum amount of complexity. We said, how do we flip our models to look at it from the perspective of the individual, right? What does the rest of the ecosystem need from that individual, and what does that individual need from the rest of the ecosystem? Typically, what the individual needs is knowledge, right, from a trusted source, who can also provide them resources provided they are, capable of applying that knowledge, right, and some form of support so that they can actually apply that learning in practice and overcome whatever local difficulties and accomplish outcomes. This is what that individual needs. In addition to that, while that individual is a representative of the community, they're also a human being, an individual, right? So if they keep doing this, they want a life, they want livelihood, they want to be recognized as a practitioner who has expertise in that area. So today what happens is we don't recognize them. Most social workers, we refer to them in the masses, but nobody knows their name, and none of them have any digitally verifiable record of their accomplishments. They don't have a career pathway that looks like this, which most of us have. Theirs looks like this at best, right? They get paid the same after 30 years of work, which is very sad. So we've got to address that. But then the rest of the ecosystem, if only these people, as they're doing the work, if they can generate data about what they have learned, what problem they're addressing, at the behest of which program, and what they've currently engaged in, what activities they're doing. Imagine if we could generate this data and give visibility to the right programs in the state. We realize that actually that changes the way that the state responds to this. So we are seeing states like Meghalaya, different ministries, different programs taking interest in this, different organizations. Argem has been leading this effort. And we will, excuse me.
Half an hour of talking that I've made you do.
Yeah. No, there is a way we are starting to realize that it's our inability to see, as Sanjay Purohit once said, from Social Platform said, if you improve your ability to see, you improve your ability to solve. So I will leave it with that. Of course, if somebody wants to get into more detail, maybe it's another session or we can have a separate conversation about it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Anand. I think you've given us a very different way of, looking at the issues, looking at, like, despite things being complex, issues that have to be solved at scale, that there is possibility to go down that path, right? If we keep, like, the individual, the community, at the center and we let them lead. Thank you once again. And for all of you all who joined, thank you so much for being part of this live. Thanks.
Thank you, Smarinita. Thank you, everyone.